So this clip here is the first time I'm working on a shoulder target for George. Basically, the end goal is that I can have my driving whip out on his side, and that is supposed to teach him to move his body over to the right or to the left when he's in the cart. Just like with any shoulder target, we start out with a touching of the target to his shoulder, basically just to make that connection of shoulder touching the target. That's what gives him a click. That's what gives him his food and his reinforcement. We start out with 3 touches, and then I ask for the first weight shift. Here I'm just holding out the cloth, the target, and I'm being careful to not to touch him with it. And I just wait, see if he offers a weight shift. The moment his shoulder moves closer to the target, I touch him with it, I click and reward. Now usually we want about an 80% success rate with the previous step before moving on to the next step. But he offered a step with his outside front leg, and so I decided to hold off and see if he could give me another step. And he ended up doing that. Here he got a little confused, so I helped him out by putting out my hand, and I ended up lowering my criteria. So even though he didn't take a step sideways, he took a step, and so I clicked for that because I just wanted him to, basically any effort was good enough. So I just continue to ask for any front end movement, and he does do 2 really nice repetitions here. So I actually missed something here, and it came up a little later. I thought I was clicking for a front hoof lift, but I didn't notice his back end was actually moving. So because I misclicked that one, it actually was incorporated into his loop, and you'll see here he does a step with his back end. He moves away, but he does try and move his back end, which is, at that point was fine. In the midst of training, I was like, yeah, it's all right. But you'll notice here in the next repetition, he actually moves his hind end towards me, and that's simply because he thinks this is now part of the loop. So I actually at that point didn't realize yet that this became part of the loop, and I just ignored it and waited for his front end to move. Same thing here, so he tries to move his back end over. I ignore it. I wait for his front end to move. I click and reward. Now that last repetition did help, and I actually started moving back a little bit to help him understand it was his front end that I wanted him to move, not his back end, and that worked out really well. Sometimes a repositioning helps them figure out what you want, such as like, moving back or forward a little bit. So I decided to put it onto the whip at this point because I was noticing that he seemed to have an easier time if I was standing in the back near the hindquarters and pointing out with the target. And since that was going to be the final, the cue on how we would prompt him to move his shoulder, that just might make it easier. So So I was actually standing a little bit, I was holding the whip a little further up, just so I wouldn't have that much distance at the very beginning, as I am now not holding the cloth anymore, but I'm actually holding it out on a stick in front of me. He did a really good first try here, so for the next one I'm holding it a little further, because I didn't want to get in his way. So you may have noticed that in the last few repetitions, he actually moved both his front and back end at the same time. So he did a bit more of a side pass movement rather than a isolated shoulder movement. And I'm pretty flexible with that, so I rewarded and reinforced him for it anyway. Because when he is in between the shafts of the carriage, he will actually have to move his back end as well in order to do a proper turn. I didn't want to reinforce it at the beginning because he ended up doing only a back end movement and no shoulder movement. I want him to lead with his shoulder and his hind ends just follow. And since we're going to be driving and not doing any spins anytime soon, that works out pretty good. So unfortunately my camera gave out here, so I don't actually have any more footage of what we did next. But basically we ended up working on the other side, and we started at the beginning again with a touch and then some weight shifts and then some steps until multiple steps over. And then once he seems to have a good understanding of that, we will move on to changing positions, myself changing positions around him and seeing if he can understand both sides. And then we'll start incorporating forward movement as well, so that he can actually move forward and move laterally left and right at the same time while walking forward. And so that will be what we're going to be working on next.